"You can sleep in the garage, Dad. It's warm enough and you'll have privacy." That was my son talking. My own blood standing in the middle of the kitchen I paid for telling me I didn't belong in the house I built. His wife didn't say a word. She just stared at the floor, arms crossed, like the verdict had already been read. I looked past them both, out the window, over the sink. The maple in the yard was shedding early that year. I watched a single orange leaf fall spinning slowly, landing softly on the lawn. I didn't answer him. Not right then. Because if I had opened my mouth, I might have torn the roof off that house. Instead, I took another sip of my black coffee, lukewarm, now in the same chipped navy mug I've used since '83. The handle's been glued twice. Still holds. The garage smelled like mildew and motor oil. The corners were dark boxes sagging with damp. There was a dented mini fridge from the '90s, humming low like it had a bad heart. My old Craftsman tool chest stood in the back, rusting at the wheels. I hadn't used most of those tools in years, not since my knees stiffened, and I started forgetting names. They offered me a cot and said it would be temporary just until their baby arrived, and they figured things out. That's what my son Jacob kept repeating. "We just need a little space, Dad. The baby's coming. You get it right, no?" I didn't. Because I remember when he was born. I held him in that same house just down the hall, his head no bigger than a softball. I was scared out of my damn mind. Sandra handed him to me, sweating and smiling, and said, "Your turn." I held him like a raw egg, praying I wouldn't drop him. That was 32 years ago. Now here he was telling me I didn't fit in the picture anymore, not with his new baby on the way, not in his house, except it wasn't his house. Not really. I bought this place in 1991. 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet street in Ohio, walking distance to the hardware store, 10 minutes from the plant I worked at for 30 years. I refinanced once to help Jacob pay for college. Paid off the second mortgage by taking graveyard shifts I swore I'd never take again. Sandra and I raised our boy here. We argued here. We laughed here. She died in our bedroom under the quilt her mother made with my hand in hers. The deed's in my name. Jacob and Mandy moved in 2 years ago when he got laid off, and she was pregnant with their first. "Just for a while, Dad," he said. "We'll get on our feet." I didn't ask for rent. I cooked them Sunday breakfast bacon crisp the way Mandy liked it. Egg soft, like Jacob used to eat when he was 7. I gave them the master bedroom, took the small guest room at the back, kept my mouth shut. Until today. Today they told me to move into the garage. It wasn't about space. It was about control. Mandy never liked the way I folded the towels. She hated that I watched the news too loud. Said my coffee smelled burnt. I caught her once spraying air freshener on the recliner I sit in every night. Said it smelled like old man. I said nothing. But when Jacob crossed his arms today and told me like some kind of landlord that this arrangement isn't working anymore, I walked out of the kitchen and down the hall. In the hall closet beneath my fishing vest and a dusty box of tax receipts was a red leather folder. Edges cracked, spine torn at the bottom. Inside deed title full ownership, notarized, signed, filed. I walked back to the kitchen. They were still standing there, waiting for me to agree to nod and say, "Sure, the garage sounds just fine." I laid the folder on the table and opened it. Jacob blinked. Mandy frowned. Their eyes scanned the pages. Then came that moment. That heavy, sour silence that fills a room like smoke. I didn't say a word. Just let the weight of it settle. You never transferred it," Jacob asked, voice smaller than I'd heard in years. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "No, I didn't." Mandy's face flushed. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. The baby monitor on the counter buzzed with static. I poured another cup of coffee. This time I didn't offer them any. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The mug in my hand was almost empty when Jacob turned and walked out of the kitchen. He didn't slam the door or say another word. He just left like a man stepping out of something he didn't want to explain. Mandy stayed longer. She didn't move from her spot by the fridge. Her arms were still crossed tight against her chest, her chin slightly lifted like she was bracing for a storm that didn't come. When she finally turned to leave, her eyes flicked toward the red folder still open on the table, and then she disappeared into the hallway without a sound. I stayed seated, staring at the folder and the cooling surface of my coffee, until even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to stretch into something heavier. I listened to the house. The pipes clicked in the wall like they always had this time of year when the temperature dipped and the boiler had to work harder. Upstairs, the faint whir of the baby monitor buzzed with static. My grandson was sleeping in Jacob's old room, the one we used to call the blue room, because Sandra had painted it sky blue with little clouds when Jacob turned 4. I could still remember the smell of fresh paint and lemon-scented wood polish. That room had been filled with toy trains, plastic dinosaurs, and books I used to read to him when he couldn't sleep. Now it was full of new furniture, all smooth and pale and sterile, like something out of a catalog. I wasn't asked what I thought when they redecorated. They just did it like the room had never belonged to anyone else before. I stood up slowly. My knees gave the usual protest, but I didn't let them stop me. I walked to the sink, rinsed out my mug with cold water, and dried it with the dish towel Sandra had embroidered with little apples along the hem. The thread had faded, and there was a small burn mark from when it got too close to the stove years ago, but I never replaced it. I folded it carefully and hung it on the same hook where it had always lived. Nothing in the motion felt casual. It felt like preservation. When I turned around, Mandy was standing at the entrance again. I hadn't heard her come back. She didn't look angry now, just tight and unreadable, like she'd already had the argument in her head, and was now waiting for me to lose. She looked at me in that cold, careful way she always did, when she thought I had crossed some invisible line she drew in her head. Then she said, "This living arrangement isn't sustainable." I didn't answer. "You blindsided Jacob. That wasn't fair." Still, I said nothing. I pulled out the chair and sat down again, watching her the way you might watch a storm forming in the distance. She went on, "You had that document this whole time and never said a word." I let the silence grow, let her sit with it. She hated silence. I'd learned that early on. She needed words to fill the room, needed them like furniture arranged just so. She waited for a response. I gave her none. Finally, she shifted her weight and said, "This is going to force a conversation we didn't want to have yet." I looked at her then. "Then maybe you should have waited before shoving me into the garage." She flinched just slightly, then recovered. "We didn't shove you. We asked you. And it wasn't permanent." I nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. It was her version of the truth. That's all it ever was. I stood again, moved past her, and walked down the hall. The air in the hallway felt denser now. The framed photos that lined the wall seemed to glare back at me. There was one of Jacob holding his college diploma, another of all 3 of us at his wedding. Sandra had been alive then. She wore a navy blue dress and a look that was somewhere between proud and worried. She never trusted Mandy, though she never said so outright. Just the way she moved around her, the way she avoided certain conversations. I opened the door to the garage. The cot was there already unfolded and made up with a blanket that didn't belong to me. The floor had been swept. A small lamp sat on the corner of the workbench. They'd prepared this long before today. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The smell of the garage was sharp and familiar, a mix of old oil wood dust and rubber. My toolbox sat in the corner exactly where I'd left it years ago. I walked to it and opened the top drawer. Inside were screwdrivers, wrenches, and a small folding knife. Sandra gave me one Christmas when we were still young. I picked it up, held it in my palm. The handle was smooth from years of use. I hadn't touched it in so long I almost forgot the weight of it. In the far corner of the garage, there was a cardboard box labeled Dad's Stuff. I hadn't packed that. Neither had Sandra. I crouched, opened it slowly, and found old fishing reels, a pair of boots, my army duffel bag, and a worn flannel shirt that still smelled faintly of pine and sweat. At the bottom of the box was something I didn't expect, a photo in a broken frame. It was the three of us, me, Sandra, and Jacob, standing in front of this very house the day we paid it off. The grass was yellow with early autumn. I was holding the deed in my hand, smiling like a man who thought his place in the world was finally secure. I sat down on the edge of the cot, the frame creaking beneath me. I held the photo in my lap, staring at the cracked glass, wondering how long ago it had been shoved into that box, buried under all the things they didn't want to look at anymore. Upstairs, the baby started to cry. The sound filtered down through the floor like a soft alarm, distant but sharp. I didn't move. I just sat there holding that photo while the crying grew louder, and the cold from the concrete slowly worked its way through my socks. The baby's crying kept on thin and high like the sound of something breaking over and over. I sat still holding the photo, waiting to see if anyone would come for him. After a while, the wailing stopped. Not because someone soothed him, but because he gave up. That silence stung more than the noise. I placed the picture frame beside the cot, careful not to press on the crack running across my own face in the image. Then I stood knees tight and opened the garage door into the hallway. The light from the kitchen was still on, throwing soft shadows across the floorboards. I could hear voices, now low-heated, sharp at the edges. Jacob and Mandy were talking just loud enough for a man not meant to hear. But I heard. Not every word, but enough. He planned that. You don't just pull out a deed like that unless you've been waiting to use it. He's your father. He's manipulative. He took care of us for 2 years. So what he wants a trophy for it now? I stepped back into the dark and closed the door quietly. They thought I'd planned it, that I waited with the deed in a drawer like some trap. The truth was simpler and sadder. I kept that folder because I had nothing else left of Sandra except paperwork and her voice in my head. She used to say, "Protect what you've built, Frank. People don't value things they get for free." I didn't believe her then. I do now. I went to the back door, opened it, and let the night air hit my face. The porch light buzzed softly above. The grass shimmered faintly with dew, though it wasn't late. I stepped outside and walked toward the edge of the yard, where the old lawn shed stood leaning like it wanted to fall backward into the neighbor's lot. I hadn't opened it in over a year. Inside were garden tools, 2 busted chairs, and the wheelbarrow with a cracked handle I never fixed. I fished through a stack of tarps and pulled out a box I recognized by touch. Inside, wrapped in a trash bag, was the old ceramic cookie jar Sandra loved. She used to keep loose bills in it tips from her weekend shifts at the diner before she got sick. It was shaped like a chicken with eyes too wide. Jacob hated it, said it was tacky. There was still something inside. Not money, just small things. A pressed flower. A receipt from our anniversary dinner in 1987. A silver chain broken near the clasp. Things that had no value unless you'd lived the moments they came from. I held the chain in my palm and thought about all the Sundays I cooked breakfast for them while they slept in. How I ran to the pharmacy at midnight when Mandy had morning sickness. How I parked across town for a week so she could use the driveway. How they never once said thank you. Not really. Not in the way that counts. That kind of quiet disrespect grows like mold in the corners. You don't see it at first. Then one day everything smells wrong, and you don't know when it started. Back inside, I passed the baby's door. I paused there, hand hovering just short of the knob. I remembered how Jacob used to call out at night, scared of shadows or dreams, or the sound of wind against the gutter. I'd come in, sit on the floor beside his bed, and hum tunelessly until his breath evened out. He wouldn't remember that. But I did. The door was ajar. Inside, a faint blue nightlight cast stars across the ceiling. The baby was bundled tight in a sleep sack, face turned to one side, fists clenched like tiny declarations. His cheeks were red from crying. I watched his chest rise and fall. Something in me tugged forward, something ancient and soft, but I didn't go in. I just stood there and looked at the child I was no longer trusted to hold without permission. The next morning I heard the microwave before I smelled anything. I came into the kitchen to find Mandy heating a frozen burrito. She didn't greet me. Her hair was tied back, face pale. She didn't look like she'd slept. Jacob wasn't there. "I'll be calling a realtor," she said, eyes on the rotating plate inside the machine. I didn't answer. "He wants to work something out, but I'm telling you now, this house can't hold all of us. And we're not moving." I opened the cabinet and took down the tin of coffee. The label was peeling. I filled the percolator the way I always did. She stood there watching me move around my kitchen like I was a thief. "Do you even care how this looks?" she asked. "To who? To everyone." I looked at her, then really looked. She wasn't the girl Jacob brought home from college, not anymore. That girl had bright eyes and nervous laughter. This woman was taut, polished, and tired. Whatever she had built around herself to survive this marriage and this baby, it didn't have room for me. I understood that now. I just didn't agree with it. "I'm not leaving," I said. The microwave beeped. She didn't touch the burrito. Her mouth opened, then shut again. She turned, took the baby monitor from the counter, and walked out of the room. I poured my coffee slowly, then sat down at the table. My eyes fell on the photo I'd taken from the garage the night before. It was still sitting there, forgotten. But someone had tried to clean the glass. The crack was still there, but a smudge had been wiped, not well, just enough to make the effort visible. That was the moment I realized someone else had been in the garage after me. The photo hadn't moved, but something in the air had. I stared at it a long while, fingers wrapped around the coffee cup, half drunk and going cold. There was no question in my mind either Jacob or Mandy had gone into the garage after I left. Not just for curiosity. Whoever it was had held the frame, maybe tried to clean it, maybe thought about hiding it. But they didn't. They left it where I'd set it like a gesture too half-hearted to finish. That same morning I walked out to the mailbox just as Jacob pulled into the driveway. He parked crooked his front bumper halfway across the edge of the lawn, and he stayed in the truck with the engine running longer than he needed to. When he finally got out, he had a bag of fast food in one hand and his phone in the other. He gave me a nod, short and stiff, and brushed past without a word. I followed him to the porch. You went into the garage. He didn't stop walking. I was looking for a screwdriver. You had plenty in the house. He turned then just before the door. You think everything means something, don't you? Every look, every movement. Maybe it's just a garage, Dad. Then why did you wipe the photo? He opened the door and stepped inside without answering. Later that day, Mandy's sister showed up. Her car was spotless, some white SUV with a baby on board sticker and a gym bag in the back. She strutted in like she owned part of the deed. I was in the living room, sitting in my chair, the one with the duct tape under the right arm, and she walked right past me like I was invisible. Mandy's voice carried down the hall. He's digging in. You know how stubborn he is. The sister's voice came sharp and fast. Then you'll have to make it uncomfortable. You can't raise a baby with that man brooding in the garage like some ghost. I sat there, every muscle in my face still. I'd learned long ago how to disappear inside a room I'd paid for. I stared at the muted television news anchors moving their lips over silent disasters. From the hallway, one of them laughed. That more than anything lit the match. It wasn't just the move to the garage. It was the years. Little things I'd excused reworded in my head. The way Jacob started saying your house instead of our house when talking about where he grew up. The way he stopped asking me for advice and started asking Mandy's father, a man who once got scammed into buying a timeshare in Arizona and still thought vinyl siding added property value. Sandra used to warn me this might happen. Not with malice, just gently with that quiet way she had when she was right, and wished she wasn't. I remember once, not long before her diagnosis, she looked at Jacob helping Mandy carry groceries in and said, "He loves her, Frank, but he listens to her more than he listens to himself." At the time, I thought that was a good thing. Thought he was learning to be a partner. Now I wasn't so sure. That evening dinner was quiet. Too quiet. We ate at different times now under the same roof, but in different rhythms. I waited until they were finished, then came into the kitchen to fix myself a sandwich. The mustard was gone. I checked the fridge, the door shelf, even the back behind the pickles. "Mandy," I called out, not shouting, just loud enough. She appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, as usual. "Did we run out of mustard?" She didn't blink. I threw it out. It was expired. I bought that jar last week. It smelled off. It was fine yesterday. She didn't respond, just turned and left. I stood there holding the loaf of bread, wondering how many more things would disappear without a sound. How long until my coat vanished from the rack? My boots from the back door? My shaving kit from the bathroom sink? Back in the garage, I wrote a list. Not groceries, not chores, just names. Jacob. Mandy. Sandra. Tom, my brother. Greg from the plant. Reverend Marks. Clyde the lawyer I used to drink with every third Friday. The names came fast. Some I crossed out. Some I circled. Then I flipped the notepad and wrote 3 lines. Everything has a cost. Even silence. Especially silence. I closed the pad and tucked it under the cot. The light in the garage flickered once, then held. I reached for the switch to turn it off when I heard the soft click of the kitchen door above me. Footsteps. Not one person. 2. They didn't know I was beneath them listening. Mandy whispered first. "He's not going to break. You'll have to push harder." Then Jacob, low and tired. "I know, I didn't think he'd fight back like this. He thinks this is still his home." A long silence. Then Jacob again. "Tomorrow I'll talk to the lawyer." I didn't sleep that night. Not from rage, not from fear. It was the waiting. Waiting has a sound to it when you're old. It isn't quiet. It's the ticking of pipes, the cough of the furnace, the wind rattling the side panel of the garage just enough to remind you how temporary everything is. I laid there on the cot, staring at the rafters, feeling the draft creep up through the floor. The concrete was cold. The kind of cold that didn't leave you when the sun came up. By morning, I'd made a decision, though I wasn't sure what to call it. It wasn't a plan, just a kind of stillness in the bones, a shift. I got dressed same flannel shirt I wore the day Sandra came home from the hospital for the last time. It still smelled faintly of the cedar chest she kept at the foot of our bed. I never washed that smell out. Maybe that's foolish. Maybe it's all foolish. When I stepped into the kitchen, Jacob was already there. He had the baby balanced on one hip bottle in hand. He looked like he hadn't shaved in days. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his free hand was clenched into a fist at his side. The baby was fussing, not full-on crying, just that low, tired whimper that made you feel like you'd failed something delicate. I moved quietly toward the coffee tin. Jacob didn't look at me, but he said, "I'm calling someone today." I didn't ask who. I talked to Mandy's dad last night. He says we have options. The spoon clinked against the rim of the percolator. The water hadn't boiled yet. I let the silence sit. He turned to face me. "You can't just hold this house over us like some kind of threat." "It's mine," I said calmly, like I was stating the weather. "That's not the point," he snapped. "We've built a life here." "No," I said slower now. "You built your life on mine. There's a difference." The baby let out a sharp cry. Jacob shifted, tried to bounce him gently. "I don't want this to get ugly." I didn't either. But we had already passed the line where things stayed clean. I poured the coffee, sat down, and watched him pace the room with his son. My grandson. A boy who'd one day grow up to hear this story secondhand if he heard it at all. I wondered what version he'd be told. That Grandpa was bitter, that he made things hard, that he didn't understand how families work anymore. Jacob finally looked at me. "Why are you making this harder than it has to be?" That broke something. Not loud, not theatrical, just a soft tear somewhere behind my ribs. "You want to know what hard is?" I said, my voice a little thinner than I meant it to be. "Hard is burying your wife in the rain while your son forgets to fly home. Hard is staying quiet when your daughter-in-law wipes down your chair because she thinks you smell like failure. Hard is giving up your bedroom so the two of you can have a fresh start, and then being told you're a guest in your own home." He said nothing. "I watched you learn to walk in this house. I held your hand when you were afraid of the dark. You think I'm doing this for pride? For some paper in a drawer? Still nothing. Just the baby squirming soft and red-faced. I stood slowly, every joint reminding me of its presence. I won't be moved, Jacob. Not by force, not by guilt. Not anymore." I walked past him down the hall toward the garage, but stopped at the coat rack. One of my jackets was missing. The green canvas one with the stitched cuffs. I checked the closet. It wasn't there either. When I went back into the garage, I opened the drawers again. Things were missing. Not many, but enough. My fishing knife. The small flashlight I kept by the cot. The set of screwdrivers with the red rubber grips. I looked through the trash bin and saw the remains of a shipping box. Mandy's name was on the label. I took the crumpled cardboard out and spread it flat. It had been sent to her workplace. The return address was a storage company across town. My name was nowhere on it. I drove there after lunch. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't ask permission. The girl at the counter looked up my address. Said yes, a unit had been opened 2 days ago. I asked who authorized it. "Jacob Elwood," she said, "and Amanda Elwood. Unit 209. I asked to see it. She said I couldn't, not without their permission. I left without raising my voice. But inside, something went quiet in a way that didn't feel like calm. Back at the house, I went into the garage and sat at the cot, staring at the box of old photos. I pulled out one of Sandra holding Jacob in her lap, his face still round his hands, sticky from cake. I turned it over. Her handwriting on the back said, "First birthday." His laugh sounds just like yours. I sat there for a long time. That evening, after they thought I was asleep, I heard the rumble of a van in the driveway. I peeked through the side window and saw two men unloading folding crates and bubble wrap. Mandy stood by the door, clipboard in hand. She was inventorying the garage. I stayed quiet behind the window, the pain cold against my forehead as I watched the two men lift boxes they hadn't packed. Most of what they carried hadn't been touched in years, tools from the job I retired from, keepsakes, too heavy with memory, to display pieces of a life nobody in that house bothered to ask about. Mandy stood with her clipboard angled, just so nodding, directing them, as if she knew what each item meant. As if it were hers to move. I didn't step outside. Not then. There's a kind of power in stillness that people like her never learn to read. I waited until the garage emptied, until the sound of tires faded down the street, and the door shut with a hollow finality that echoed longer than it should have. Then I walked out into the space they'd tried to erase. It was gutted. Not just cleared, but stripped of its weight. The cot was still there, the frame bent slightly from years of use, the blanket folded in a way that told me someone had touched it and wanted me to know. The photo was gone. The cookie jar. Even the toolbox, my father's toolbox, was missing. They hadn't moved me out. They'd moved me down, like a piece being shifted off the board. For a long moment I just stood there, fingers flexing at my sides. Then I crouched, slow joints stiff, and lifted a corner of the plywood under the cot. I kept a few things their old habit. Beneath the boards, wrapped in cloth, was a small rusted tin I hadn't opened since Sandra's last birthday. Inside were 2 letters. One she wrote me. One I wrote and never sent. I unfolded mine. The writing was steadier than I remembered. I read it again, not for content, but for the tone. I wasn't angry when I wrote it. Just tired. It was a letter of love and apology and warning. A father asking his son to be better than him, and fearing he wouldn't be. I burned it that night in the fire pit behind the house. Not out of regret, but because I didn't need it anymore. Words only mean something when someone's willing to hear them. The flame took its time, curling each line into smoke, the ash breaking into flakes that drifted up into the black sky like the last breath of something small and old. I didn't sleep. I made a list instead. This time not names, just needs. I wrote down everything plainly, like someone trying to remember what matters, the spare keys, a fresh copy of the deed, Clyde's number, a reminder to print the old photos to secure the garage from now on, and to ask about access to the storage unit. By sunrise, the plan had shape. Not revenge, not petty defense, something cleaner. I boiled fresh coffee and drank it outside on the porch where Sandra used to sit and count birds in the early light. The sun cut across the lawn, turning the dew gold. A squirrel darted across the driveway and disappeared beneath the hedge Jacob never trimmed. The silence was mine again. Around mid-morning I called Clyde. He still had the same voice, like sandpaper wrapped around an old hymn. We hadn't spoken in a year, maybe more. Didn't need to. But he answered on the second ring. "Frank," he said, "thought you died." "Not yet," I said. "But I might be coming back to life." We met for lunch. Diner out on Route 42, same place we used to go after union meetings. He ordered meatloaf. I ordered coffee. "I need your help," I said. He listened. That's why I called him. Clyde never filled the air with noise. When I finished explaining everything, even the parts that embarrassed me, he nodded once and said, "So, you want to draw a line? I want to protect what's left." We talked about power of attorney, about occupancy rights, about eviction. He scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad, tore off the page, and slid it across the table. "They've already moved your property without consent," he said. "That's leverage." I didn't smile, but I felt something stir. Not triumph, just gravity shifting back into balance. When I returned home, Jacob's truck was gone. Mandy was alone in the living room, baby monitor in her lap. She didn't look up as I walked past her. I didn't speak. In the garage, I bolted the door from the inside, found an old padlock and attached it to the side entrance. Then I placed the cot upright, leaned it against the wall, and swept the floor clean until there was nothing left but concrete and dust. I sat on the step and stared at the empty space like a man remembering the shape of a missing tooth. Later that afternoon, I went to the back bedroom, the guest room they'd shoved me into before the garage, and stood in the doorway. It was empty, unused. I opened the closet. Still smelled like cedar and lavender. Sandra's scent, faint and unreachable. The quilt her mother made was folded on the shelf. I took it down, held it to my chest, and sat on the edge of the bed. From the hallway came the sound of the front door opening. Jacob's voice. "Where is he?" Mandy, cold and clipped, locked in the garage, like some king guarding a pile of junk. A pause. Then Jacob again. "He met with a lawyer today." Silence. "He's drawing up something." I saw the folder in his hand. "What if he—" "Then we need to move faster." Their footsteps grew louder, approaching. I stood, folded the quilt carefully, and opened the drawer of the nightstand. Inside was a single house key. Mine. Still marked with the little blue tag I'd written on years ago, Frank, Maine. As I closed the drawer, I heard Mandy's voice again just outside the door. "He still thinks this is his house." Then Jacob lower. "He still doesn't know we've already listed it." I stood there with the quilt still folded in my arms, the key warm in my palm. Their voices outside the bedroom door were muffled, now retreating, but the words lingered like smoke. They'd listed the house, not planned to, not threatened to. Done it. I could almost see it, the photos of my living room on some real estate website, the caption calling it, "Charming, well-kept, move-in ready." No mention of the man still living in the garage. No mention of the 30 years of life under that roof. I opened the top drawer of the nightstand and placed the key inside my front pocket, then walked slowly back into the hallway. The house was quiet again. That eerie kind of quiet you only notice when something has gone wrong, and no one wants to say it aloud. I moved toward the garage, passed through the kitchen where the sink still held Jacob's breakfast plate, half a strip of bacon curled like a question mark on the edge. I didn't stop. I unlocked the side door and stepped into the cold. Down the street, Clyde was waiting in his pickup parked one house down like we agreed. He tipped his head when I climbed in. We didn't speak until we reached the county clerk's office. He'd called ahead. I'd signed what I needed to sign. I carried my folder, now filled not only with the deed, but copies of every letter photo of my belongings in the garage, printed statements of their moving service, and the online listing. All organized, all time-stamped. Clyde had done this before. Back at the house, I stood across the street and looked at it the way I imagine a soldier stares at a city after a war. Familiar, wounded, waiting to see what would fall next. Clyde stayed in the truck. This part I had to do alone. Inside, Jacob was in the living room, pacing with his phone to his ear. He didn't notice me at first. I could hear Mandy's voice in the kitchen talking low but fast, the baby crying somewhere upstairs. I stepped fully into the room. Jacob looked up and froze. "We need to talk," I said. He lowered the phone without ending the call. "Now." "Yes, now." Mandy appeared behind him, eyes narrow. "We're in the middle of something." "So am I." I placed the folder on the dining table and opened it. They didn't move. They watched me like I'd brought in a snake coiled under my arm. "These are copies of the listing you posted. I printed them before they're taken down. This," I flipped to another page, "is the property damage report for the items taken from the garage. And this," I slid a notarized form forward, "is notice of intent to pursue civil restitution for unauthorized removal and sale of personal property." Jacob's mouth opened slightly. "You're suing us." "No, I'm defending myself." "I can't believe this," Mandy muttered, backing into the kitchen. "You tried to sell the roof over my head without telling me." "It's your name on the paper, sure," Jacob said, voice shaking slightly, "but you weren't using it." "That's not how ownership works. We needed the space. You weren't cooperating. You needed me gone." His silence answered for him. I stepped back from the table and let the weight of the room do its work. The baby was still crying upstairs, the sound sharpening against the tension. Jacob looked at the floor. Mandy had disappeared completely, her footsteps echoing down the hall. I didn't need them to argue. I needed them to understand they'd gone too far. Then Jacob said something I didn't expect. "You're doing this to punish me." I looked at him. The same eyes he had at 5 years old when he knocked over the porch lamp and blamed the wind. Still searching for someone to carry the blame. "No," I said. "I'm doing this so you remember who taught you what fairness means." His face hardened, but something behind it faltered. His shoulders didn't rise like they usually did. He didn't square off like a man ready to fight. He just stood there holding still like a boy waiting for the lesson to be over. I turned and walked toward the stairs. They didn't follow. At the top, I passed the nursery door, slightly ajar. The baby had cried himself hoarse. I stepped in, leaned over the crib, and looked at the boy, red-cheeked, breathing heavy, tiny fists still trembling. I reached out, slowly adjusted the corner of his blanket, and stepped back. I didn't touch him. I didn't need to. He was the only one in the house still unspoiled by pride. I made my way to the master bedroom. The door creaked when I opened it. Everything was in its place. Their place. But the air still remembered Sandra. I opened the top drawer of the dresser and found what I hoped I'd find. Tucked beneath a stack of undershirts was the envelope my original will sealed, signed, dated. Never revoked. Sandra's handwriting still marked the corner. "Keep safe." I took it, reached into my back pocket, placed something in its place, the photo of the three of us, the one they had taken from the garage. I left it there face up, then I locked the bedroom door behind me. I stayed in the master bedroom longer than I meant to. Not to reclaim it, not to remember it, but to feel the walls around me respond. Houses hold memory like lungs hold breath. They don't exhale until someone forces them to. I sat at the edge of the bed and listened not for footsteps, but for the silence that comes when two people downstairs are trying to figure out who's to blame and who's to beg. Eventually the knock came. Dad Jacob's voice, too soft to be casual, too flat to be apologetic. "Open the door." I stood and opened it without a word. He looked smaller than usual, like the hallway itself had pushed in around him. Behind him, the shadows stretched toward the stairs. "You can't lock yourself in here," he said. "I didn't," I said. "You did. The moment you told me to live in the garage." He stepped in, jaw tight. "This has gone too far." I gestured toward the photo on the dresser. "That go too far?" stealing from me, lying to me, listing my house behind my back. You weren't supposed to find out yet. That's not the defense you think it is. He ran a hand through his hair, the same nervous tic he had when he was 16 and wrecked my truck. Look, I admit, we handled it wrong. But you've been impossible. I've been quiet. There's a difference. He looked around the room, eyes landing briefly on the closet, the window, the bed. Mandy's talking about moving in with her sister. She says you've created an unsafe environment. I laughed once, sharp and dry. I'm the threat now. Emotionally, I took a step toward him. You know what's dangerous, Jacob, erasing a man while he's still breathing. That's what you two did. You made plans around me like I was already dead. I gave you the deed, the room, the keys, and you gave me a cot and a silence so thick I had to learn to breathe through it. He didn't answer. You ever ask yourself how you got here? I said, lowering my voice. How a man who used to chase fireflies in the backyard, who begged me for piggyback rides until I couldn't feel my spine, turned into someone who'd rather see his father moved like furniture than have a conversation. He looked down. You think this is about the house, I said. It's not. It's about what happens when love gets lazy, when gratitude becomes entitlement, when the people you raised stop seeing you as human. He looked up, then eyes wet but not breaking. I didn't mean for it to go like this. That's the problem. You didn't mean anything at all. You just let it happen. The air between us hung like a rope pulled tight. He started to speak again, but another voice cut in from the hallway. You done. Mandy's silhouette filled the doorframe. Her face was a mask. Because I'm not standing here while he shames you in your own house. Jacob turned to her. Mandy. No, she said, brushing past him. I've been patient. But this ends now. She faced me square. You want to talk about gratitude? Let's talk. You think we haven't sacrificed. You think living here is easy. Your mood, your silence, your judging looks every time I so much as move a piece of furniture. You act like you're some noble victim, but you've been holding this house over our heads since we moved in. I built this house with your husband's future in mind. I let you in because family is supposed to mean something. And we stayed because we didn't want to see you rot alone in this place. Her voice didn't tremble. Mine didn't either. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a copy of the new filing, a petition for sole occupancy and control of the property pending an emergency hearing. She took it, skimmed it, and when her eyes landed on the signature from the county clerk, her hand curled slightly at the edges. You're evicting us. I'm reclaiming my home. Jacob looked between us like a boy caught in the crossfire of something ancient and unsolvable. This isn't how it's supposed to end, he said. It's not the end I told him. It's the first honest moment we've had in years. Mandy threw the paper onto the bed. You think a judge is going to side with a bitter old man over a young family with a baby? I don't think I said. I know. Because the law is slower than betrayal, but it's louder when it catches up. The baby began crying from upstairs again. No one moved. Then something shifted so small I almost missed it. Jacob stepped forward, placed a hand on Mandy's arm and said, Go upstairs. She stared at him. Please, he said. She left without a word. When we were alone, he sank into the chair by the window and let out a long breath. I don't hate you, he said. I know. I just didn't know how to handle being your son and being a man at the same time. I sat across from him. Then this is your chance to choose which one you want to be. He looked at me long and quiet. Then said, You left something in the garage. What was it? A notebook, folded in the lining of the cot. My chest tightened. Did you read it? He nodded. Just the last page. He didn't say what was written there, but I did. I never stopped loving you, even when you disappeared inside yourself. He nodded again. Then the doorbell rang. Jacob stood, first walked towards the sound. When he opened the door, a woman stood on the porch. She was holding a clipboard, and behind her 2 men were unloading a for sale sign from the back of a van. I watched them through the window. The woman with the clipboard wore a blazer too stiff for the weather heels that sank slightly into the soft patch of dirt near the walkway. She smiled with professional courtesy as she handed Jacob a folder. He didn't open it, just held it like it weighed more than paper should. The two men stood beside the van, waiting to see where to plant the sign, the kind with a bright white post and a swinging board beneath it. It was blank, not yet marked for sale, but the shape alone was enough. It was like seeing a headstone lowered into the grass before the name was carved. I stepped away from the glass and back toward the hallway. I didn't need to see what happened next. I already knew. Jacob would say something quiet, maybe ask for a minute. The agent would nod, already checking her watch. Mandy would appear from the stairs, her voice sharp, her tone decisive. The sign would go in, or it wouldn't. But either way, the shift had already happened. Not in the courts, not on the lawn. Inside him. I returned to the back bedroom, the one they had emptied, the one I had slowly reclaimed. I sat on the edge of the bed, the same spot where I once folded Sandra's quilt, the fabric still creased like a held breath. The room smelled faintly of dust and old cedar. Outside, the late afternoon light filtered in soft and golden, as if the sun was trying to touch what no one else could reach. There's something about aging that no one prepares you for. People talk about the body, how it creaks, how it slows, but they don't talk about the emotional residue, how things stay lodged in you like splinters. A word said wrong 10 years ago, a look that lingered too long, or silence sharp as a blade that never got filled. You carry it, even when you tell yourself you've let go. I thought about Jacob as a boy. He used to chase fireflies in this yard barefoot, laughing with his whole chest, that open kind of joy that only children and fools can manage. I thought about how he used to wait by the window when I came home late, holding up a drawing or a toy or a half-eaten apple he'd saved because he thought I liked them. Somewhere along the line, the window closed. I didn't even hear it shut. He became a man in front of me, and I didn't adjust fast enough to keep up. Maybe I held on too tightly to the boy I remembered. Maybe that made space too small for the man he became. But being a father isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about staying in the room when the door gets slammed. It's about making coffee when no one says thank you. About folding the same quilt year after year and knowing someone still sleeps warm because of it. I never wanted to fight Jacob. I wanted to remind him, self-respect isn't pride. It's not noise. It's not revenge. It's choosing not to disappear just because someone decided you're in the way. It's walking back into your own house when everyone hoped you'd fade into the corners. It's knowing your worth doesn't shrink with age, that your story doesn't end because someone else turned the page. Forgiveness now, that's harder. That's where it pinches, because you can't forgive without acknowledging you've been hurt. And once you've done that, you have to decide if the person who caused that pain still deserves access to your quiet, to your mornings, to your history. I'll forgive Jacob. Not because he's asked, not because he deserves it yet, but because I won't let bitterness finish what neglect started. I'll forgive him because Sandra would have wanted me to. Because somewhere in that tight, confused man who let his wife treat me like a tenant, there's still the boy who held my finger with his whole hand and called it strength. As for justice, it doesn't always come from courts. Sometimes it comes from knowing you were right to stand up even when everyone else said, sit down. Justice is slow, but when it finally arrives, it doesn't need applause. Just presence. I heard footsteps approach the room. The knock was soft. Jacob stood in the doorway. He didn't look at me right away. "They're gone," he said. I nodded. "We pulled the listing," he added. "It's off the market." He didn't say why. He didn't have to. He stepped inside and sat in the chair across from me, the one Mandy had tried to move out 3 times. He looked older than yesterday. I told them we need to figure things out before anything else happens. "You do," I said. He looked up. "We do." The light through the window stretched farther across the floor, crawling toward the photo frame I'd set back on the dresser. He saw it. Didn't touch it. Just looked. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. "I know. Silence again, but not the bad kind this time. The kind that makes space for something to return." The baby cried faintly in the distance, and for the first time in weeks, Jacob didn't rush to go. Instead, he asked, "Will you stay?" I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I never left. Thanks for listening to the story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment to let us know what you think."